So thank you everyone for being here today. A huge thank you to Taras Beek for being here today, who is a very busy person, as you can see from the email introduction and announcement about Taras being our featured guest today, that he's really done a tremendous amount of work with a number of organizations. Even a brief glance at his biography online indicates just sort of the huge range of work that he's done as a journalist, that he worked as a trainee at the representative office of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine in Lviv, that he worked as a journalist and head of the World News Department at the Lvivska Gazeta newspaper, that he worked for 3.5 years at the Secretariat of President Yushchenko. He worked with the European Commission in Brussels and has also worked for the International Republican Institute on the development of democratic practices all over Ukraine, and is currently working with at least 3 different organizations as a member of the board of the NGO for the Agency for Recovery and Development, head of the NGO Freedom Friends, and is working with the Free Nations of Post-Russia Forum, which discusses future scenarios for Russia after the war. So thank you for being here today, because we know that you are tremendously busy with very important work that you're doing. Jeff Glynn is going to be moderating our discussion today for the most part, but we do usually start out with a couple of general questions. And one is, how are you doing?
Thank you for inviting me, for giving me this opportunity. Well, it's really one of the hardest questions today, because even if we're doing well, we cannot say that everything is fine because of the war in our country. But despite this, we are very active and trying to be well.
Good. That sounds like a very honest answer as well. And Jeff, if you'd like to jump in with our second question that we always start with.
It's been kind of our tradition. I believe you're friends with Roman Alexenko, and I feel honored to be able to fill his shoes for today, since he's abroad. But the other thing that we like to ask our guests is what does Ukrainian victory look like for you personally, and in terms of your professional experience as well?
Mm-hmm. So I will start from what is often perceived as a victory. And in this regard, we hear quite often that ceasefire would be victory, or Ukraine returning to the borders of 1991 would be victory. For me, none of this is an option, because, having ceasefire with Russia, we have very old rule, very old formula, which is over 100-year old, that any paper that you sign agreement with Russia is not worth the paper that is written on. So if you're talking about ceasefire, it can be temporary. We can have arrest while Russia will regroup its forces and will attack again. But the same is the case with the returning to the borders of 1991. As long as we have Russia behind our borders, we will still have a threat of being attacked. And I'm sure this is only a question of time when Russia returns. So for me, victory would be possibility of next generations to live without war. I really hope that my generation will be the last generation which is fighting the Russia. And if Russia remains in its current form and shape after this war, it will be only a matter of time when it attacks us again. So talking broadly, is victory for me is possibility for Ukrainians, well, not only Ukrainians, but even Europeans and even nations of Russia, possibility for them to live in a free and democratic world.
Very well said. And I think that in the further parts of the interview, we'll talk a little bit about kind of how you imagine that can take place. So, but thank you for sharing that. I'm going to refer, actually, when we were thinking about these questions, I had seen a podcast with you with Joe Lindsley, I believe, and Free Nation, Land of the Free is a podcast. It was a very nice interview, by the way. And I don't want to go back through it as much as just maybe touch on a few things that you said. You'd mentioned that the Maidan Revolution was a pivotal moment, not only for the country, but also for you personally, and a true stand against authoritarianism. So kind of looking back on that, how's that shaped your understanding of your own civic duty and kind of like the processes and the leadership that you've taken now?
Well, talking about civic duty, I would go back even to the Orange Revolution. I remember very well that, well, when everyone came to the Orange Revolution in 2004, and then basically we achieved our victory. The re-elections were appointed, the falsified elections were cancelled, and many people returned from the Orange Revolution, from Maidan, without realizing that everything depends on them. They expected some kind of miracles from Viktor Yushchenko, that he will come to power. Now he becomes president. We were very successful. We played our role on Maidan, and now Viktor Yushchenko will bring the order to the country. It doesn't work this way, and clearly it was difficult to reform country properly, even though I think there were quite many reforms under Viktor Yushchenko. But without entire nation being mobilized for these reforms, it's impossible to conduct comprehensive reforms, to go like through really profound changes. One of the examples when I realized this was basically one of the several days after I returned from Kyiv, from the Orange Revolution, to Lviv. I was going in a bus to my work, and I heard two students talking that after they returned from the revolution, so they were so, inspired that like, okay, we achieved victory, we will have democracy now. And then they suddenly switched to a different topic. So they started discussing what amount of bribe they are going to pay to their professors for a good mark. So this was like the moment I realized that nothing has changed in the heads of people. So in shape, in form, they really won the revolution. Everything was nice, but nothing has changed in the heads of people. So in this regard, I would say that the revolution, this was the major difference with the Revolution of Dignity of 2014. After we won the revolution, well, we should remember that the key difference between two revolutions was that the second was much more bloodier. We did not have any blood shed on during the Orange Revolution, but following the Revolution of Dignity, we had around 100 people killed, called Heavenly 100. So we paid much higher price for the victory. And I have a feeling that many more people realize that it's not about president, it's not about parliament, it's about everyone, and everything depends on the success of reforms depends on everyone. So that's why I would say this is the major difference. And many people realize that we have to do reforms starting, from creating housing associations in their neighborhood and trying to bring order on the level of their multi-apartment buildings or in the neighborhood, going through different, advocacy campaigns to achieve changes on local level, on national level, and even joining parliaments, ministries, because we had quite many successful people from civil society, from businesses who went into government, who went into politics to do some positive changes. And so this is when we had this many grassroots movement, we had this really many advocacy campaigns, which resulted in some positive changes. In my opinion, since 2014, during the next 5 years, we had the greatest number of reforms in the history of Ukraine, despite the ongoing war, because the war did not begin in 2022. The war had started, Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, basically on the second day after the Orange Revolution, the Revolution of Dignity. So I would say that realization by the people of their civic duty to reform the country was the major difference between the Orange Revolution and Revolution of Dignity. And this would basically helped us to do positive changes in the country, and even to prepare us for the upcoming full-scale war with Russia.
I just love the story that you told about the students on the train talking about democracy and everything was different, and then pivoting to how much do we bribe the professor, like how do we do this to get the good grade. And so Jeff is graciously letting me jump in to ask a follow-up question about this. There's a lot of talk, especially outside Ukraine, probably also in it, about the issue of corruption, but also putting it in the correct perspective, that corruption issues have gotten a lot better, that actually things have, there's a stereotype of corruption in Ukraine, but there's also a reality, and that things have actually improved quite dramatically on this front. But what you were saying, especially about like the local level and the grassroots initiatives, made me really want to ask you about your perspective on corruption at the local level in Ukraine, and how should we view it in the right perspective of not perpetuating a stereotype that's incorrect, But tackling those local provisions of public services, public goods that are so critical to resilience and rebuilding. So what is a sort of, how should we think about local level corruption in Ukraine?
I will start talking about general corruption because I think these two levels, it's really hard to separate them. And well, my first message would be that when you hear that Ukraine is the most corrupt country in the world, well, you can be quite sure this is part of the Russian propaganda, just trying to pursue this idea that Ukraine is a failed state and the most corrupt state. Since 2014, we had quite comprehensive anti-corruption reforms all over the country. So first of all, starting from the national level, we established a system of institutions, of anti-corruption institutions, which basically, I think, do not exist anywhere in the world. So this is a National Corruption Prevention Agency, National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, Special Anti-Corruption Prosecution Office. Then we have, finally in 2019, we had launched the Higher Anti-Corruption, Supreme Anti-Corruption Court. So basically, we have this chain of institutions which resulted in like real effect, because real efficiency, because we have many high-level officials, former MPs who are now in jail because of corruption. So something that has not happened before. Talking about local level, I can tell about two major examples, actually three reforms that resulted in good anti-corruption results. First of them was the police reform. So, we had this patrol police, the road police, which was, I would say, kind of a symbol of corruption, because if you were stopped while driving, well, whether you were guilty or not, usually people would have to pay some bribe to let you go. I was actually, one of few persons not paying bribes. If I did not violate the rules, and even if I did, I demanded like penalty, I was not ready to pay the bribe. And I remember once I received a call, which basically, kind of surprised me. I received a call from national media, and they asked like, "Oh, are you Taras? Are you like the one who is not giving bribes to the road police?" I was like, "Yeah, why?" So it turns out I was telling the story to my friend. He told to journalists, and journalists were trying to find me like as like one of you guys who is not giving bribes to road police. So, and they really came to meet me, and I was like on national TV, like, the guy who has like superpowers, he is not giving bribes to the police.
That's fantastic. You made national TV for not paying bribes to the traffic police.
So this was basically reality until 2014. And after we introduced this patrol police, like it was not a single time that they demanded bribe. Even if I violated the rules, because before that you did not have violate the rules for them to stop you and demand the bribe. But after 2013, 2015, when it was properly launched, they would stop you only if you like really violated the rules, and they would give you a fine, and nobody would demand a bribe. I mean, obviously there are some exclusions. In any country there are exclusions, but corruption in road police as like systemic problem has simply disappeared. Another example is the reform of healthcare, which was conducted by acting minister Uliana Suprun, who arrived actually from the United States and was working as acting minister of healthcare. And it was like another level of, I would say, common bribe. And here, because of extremely low salaries of doctors, people usually, well, some doctors demanded bribes, but it was like quite common for Ukrainians to give a kind of gratitude, to compensate for low salary. So corruption was quite popular on this level as well. So what Minister Suprun did, she totally reformed the primary level of healthcare, basically about GPs, about family doctors. She created a system when family doctors started basically competing for patients among themselves, which created, she provided more money. She reformed the procurement system, which was like, totally corrupt. She invited many young people who came to power and basically were in charge of reforming the system. That's how more money appeared. And as a result, because, she created a system when it was not beneficial for family doctors to demand bribes. On the contrary, in order to earn more money officially, they had to provide more services. So they had to find more patients, more clients, and for each client, the state would allocate some money. So she created this, I would say, market economy system for on the level of healthcare care, basically which eradicated corruption. So unfortunately, she could not finish her reform because she was removed from office in 2019. So, but if you are talking about primary level corruption, it was pretty much removed. And finally, I would say the most important anti-corruption reform, even though it does not sound as anti-corruption, is the decentralization reform, because which was launched right after the Revolution of Dignity. Because earlier, how the system was working, it was legacy of Soviet Union. It was extremely centralized. All the money were collected from regions. They were going to a state budget, and then they were allocated back to the cities, to communities, to regions. But in order to get this money, let's say a mayor or a governor had to go to Kiev to make some deals, and usually through some mediators he would receive those money, and of course some of this, like a share of this money, would stay in the hands of mediators. So what the government did, they reformed they organized decentralization of the government. They gave as much as possible competences, money, possibilities for local authorities, so that we do not have to move this money from regions to center, and then back to regions. I would say this is the most efficient reform which happened since 2014. It is still working. One of the indicators for the efficiency of the reform, when we are talking about elections of local elections of 2020, basically almost all of the mayors of big cities of 23 regional centers, I think except for 2, were re-elected with huge majority. Why? Because in 2015, after the Revolution of Dignity, they received more money, more competences, and smart mayors, they realized that they can invest this money into development of their cities, so that they are re-elected. And people saw real results. I mean, new hospitals, kindergartens, roads, parks, and so on, and which helped those mayors to be re-elected for the next term. So, and I always say that it's much easier to control corruption on local level than on national level, because if corruption is happening on, let's say, on the level of ministry, it's really hard to get to this ministry and to break the system. But if corruption is happening on local level, well, I mean, people can see mayor, well, at least every, I don't know, Sunday in the church, every weekend somewhere, like anywhere. And well, they can physically reach him and put him into a garbage bin. We have such tradition as well. So to conclude, do not believe when you hear that the Ukraine is the most corrupt country in the world. Do not believe it. But of course, it does not mean that corruption does not exist in Ukraine. Unfortunately, corruption is still a problem, quite a big problem. But thanks to these anti-corruption institutions, we are fighting it, and I would say fighting it quite successfully. And one of the most important indicators, if you compare corruption in Russia and Ukraine, is the full-scale invasion. Because I think it has become a really good indicator that if corruption existed in Ukraine on the level as Russia was talking about it, Ukraine would have collapsed. We would not have like normal army, everything would have collapsed. On the contrary, one of the many reasons why Russia failed during first days of invasion, because the system in Russia is so corrupt, everyone is reporting from lowest level, everyone is given money in the army to, I don't know, to modernization of weapons, to support the soldiers, and so on and so on. Those money are stolen, but they report to the top level that everything is fine. And that's why, the first days of the Russian invasion were total failure, because it turned out that the king is naked. They do not have the capacity, the possibility, because everything was stolen because of total corruption. So this is yet another good example if you compare corruption in Ukraine and Russia.
That's why they're resorting to getting North Korean soldiers now. Because things are so bad. So there's so many interesting threads in the things that you've just said about the sort of framing of corruption and emphasizing how Ukraine has actually been remarkable in fighting corruption at national levels and these new institutions that are in some ways unprecedented around the world and cutting down on national level corruption. And Oleksandr Koidel, who's at the Kyiv School of Economics, is a Ukrainian scholar, has written a lot about the decentralization reforms, but also about these local level and regional level politics and how And she's commented that the corruption is really at the national level, that the big problems with corruption that we've seen. I'm interested to hear you talk more about the decentralization reforms, because this is very closely related, I think, to the work that you do as well. And these mayors that can now have actual power over the money, the policy making. They can do things like provide kindergartens, roads, local services, and they have the direct control. Which kinds of locales do you think are the most successful? Sort of like, and sort of why is my big question. Is why were some places really so successful in doing this? But also, I'm curious what your thoughts are about the 2020 local elections that happened, because those happened in such an interesting context. Right after 2019, right after Zelensky was in power, Servant of the People Party had a majority. And those were the last local elections we've seen, of course, because the full-scale invasion means elections can't happen. But so those are, I have a lot of questions built in there, but I think sort of like why have some places done better than others is one question. And then also, I'm curious about your thoughts on the 2020 local elections.
Yeah, I would say these questions are interconnected. I think it really depends on the political culture of local elected officials. If they are, if they want to do some positive changes for their community, or if they want simply, to steal money. And we are creating through the work that we are doing. At that time, I was working at International Republican Institute, the powerful American think tank, which is basically responsible for the logo is advancing democracy worldwide. But in practical terms, it means that what we have done, we were realizing trainings, seminars, exchange trips, and so on, mainly for local officials. So I was traveling all around the country, meeting local officials, political party members, civil society activists, and we were organizing them study trips abroad in Ukraine, like giving some training on anti-corruption and so on. And I would say that these horizontal ties, they created this. First, they provided with knowledge for people who are trying to bring positive changes, but they did not have knowledge how to do it properly. So we provided knowledge how to introduce anti-corruption mechanisms, for example, how to advocate good decision by civil society, and so on. And second, we try to disseminate this like Western political culture that corruption is wrong, that corruption is a kind of post-Soviet legacy. And like, yes, you can earn some money, but you can either go to jail and you can ruin your reputation, and you will not be handshakeable with your Western partners. And so that's why many, I would say many mayors, especially of big cities, they have, I would say, reached this level of political culture. They realize that it's time to do something positive, some positive changes in the cities. Like one of the best examples here was the leadership of Mariupol, one of the cities we were working with. And they were elected, those were like, I would say, young gentlemen and ladies who were team from the one of the private companies of even though they were working for private companies of the richest Ukrainian oligarchs, but they were young, they were Western educated, and they were strong project managers. And then when they came to power in Mariupol after 2015, I think, first time elections, and then 2020, and they saw that they have like this really strong support from the West. They had good cooperation with the United States, with France, and so on. And that's why they have started, to introduce positive changes in the city. I remember one of the first decisions of there was to increase salary of local officials, basically of themselves. But they were quite open about this. They said like, okay, local officials cannot have low salary. If you want local officials to be as far from corruption as possible, well, first of all, they have to have decent salary. And of course, it was, very discussable question. Not many residents like this idea, but they were quite open about this. And they said, we have to secure with good conditions our officials so that they do not have seduction to steal money. I mean, usually, yes, it's not the only safeguard that keeps people from stealing money, because, well, quite often, even, extremely rich people try to become more rich through corruption. But in this case, I think it worked quite well. And Mariupol, like, there were huge number of positive changes in Mariupol, on the streets, on in water supply system, in businesses, and so on and so on. And it was like really extremely heartbreaking for me to see, you know, how the Mariupol was being destroyed by Russians, because, well, so much money, efforts were invested in the city, and then, well, happened what happened. So I think this was like one of many examples, and not only in Mariupol, in many other places all over Ukraine. And what is interesting, it did not depend on political party, because, well, in Mariupol we had people who were elected first from I think it was opposition bloc, which is like former pro-Russian party of regions. In Western Ukrainian cities like Ternopil, Ivano-Frankivsk, we have mayors elected from right party Svoboda. Then we have like local parties and so on and so on. But the successes of the city, actually, I would not say that they depended on the party. It depended rather on the people who came with a strong team and who wanted to make some positive changes on local level.
It's so interesting that it didn't depend on the party a lot. And I know that local elections, the parties are a lot different than at the national level. There's a lot more diversity of the parties. And so like, but it's interesting that like the opposition bloc winning, like they could still, there was still positive outcomes, that it didn't matter that it was the successor to the party of the regions, to the Yanukovych party. Because I wonder what your thoughts are about in 2020, some observers bemoaned the fact that Servant of the People didn't do better in the local elections. And other people didn't think that was a big problem, but some outside observers said, oh, look, Zelensky, it's only been a year and he's losing support and all of this. And other people said, no, that's not the situation of what's going on. But I'm curious what your thoughts are about that for the 2020 local elections.
Yes, out of all regional centers that we had elections, there was not a single mayor elected from Zelensky, from Servant of the People. So they lost all elections from Servant of the People. If we are talking about big regional centers, 23 cities. Yes, I mean, one of the reasons here is that people were disappointed because, you know, in 2019, there were like huge hopes from Zelensky, from his team. He created this, you know, based on his movie, he created these expectations that everything will change overnight after he comes to power. But then turned out it doesn't work this way. And many MPs who were elected on his list turned out to be corrupt people, turned out to be not so efficient as they were expected. And yeah, so I would say the first reason was we already saw disappointment in his team. But still, I would say the major reason was the decentralization reform and the fact that mayors were elected, those mayors who were elected in 2015, and because they received more competences, more money, they successfully invested this money and competences into development of their cities. And that's how they developed this, you know, bigger trust for among local residents towards them. So I think this was still the major reason why they were re-elected.
It's kind of like decentralization made things work despite politics, or because that's maybe not exactly the right way to put it.
I would say I would agree. Yes. We have actually quite many disputes, especially if you're talking about local level. If we should preserve the system, this political party system on local level, because even like you really had very good example with Mariupol. So they were elected for the first time from the opposition bloc. And I talked to one council member who was from mayor's team, and he told me in private, like, well, do you think I'm pro-Russian? I'm not. But do you think I'm pro-party of regions? I'm not. I just want to do something positive in my city, and the only way to get to power in these elections to be on the list of this party. You know, he was quite open about this.
That's really interesting.
What is interesting that if we take, for example, mayor of Mariupol, who was elected from opposition bloc in 2015, in 2020, he created his own bloc, Vadim Boychenko bloc, and he was elected with his team from his own bloc. And the same happened in Western Ukraine. So several MPs, mayors who were elected earlier from Svoboda, they created their own blocs, and they were basically bringing their own teams to power based on their basically their name, because they created this name as successful mayors. So that's why we still have this discussion if we should keep this political party system on local level. I mean, for national level, it's okay because, well, we have to have some ideology. It's about, you know, foreign policy and so on and so on. But on local level, we have quite many disputes if it should be based on like a political party system or more like majoritarian single mandate district system.
Oh, that's interesting. So actual discussions about changing the electoral system at the local level?
Yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
mean, you know, the problem of Ukraine that we have always changes to any electoral system, but the worst part is that we have, you know, like 3 months before the election, and that's
Yeah.
why we have a problem with political institutions, like sustainable, strong political institutions, including political parties, because they do not know what kind of system will be used for the next elections. But yes, if you're talking about local elections, there are quite often discussions about efficiency of this system. I was once working with one of the mayor in one Western Ukrainian city, and basically I saw it from inside that many, I would say, successful good initiatives were blocked because of the disapproval from political parties. So on local level, everyone would support this initiative, but because this go against interest of political party in Kyiv, they could not support this initiative. So I would say there is, you know, common sense in about moving to more single mandate district system on local level.
That's really interesting that the national level was blocking the local initiatives and regional initiatives that could have made actual progress. And that's so we have a couple questions in queue. One is from our co-moderator Jeff, who's let me take over very graciously.
Well, you're doing brilliantly.
Because I was so enthusiastic.
Why-
Well, with it, which is building on all of this and all these things you've talked about, the issue of local politics and corruption, and sort of Ukraine's made tremendous progress, but there's still issues. What are the big challenges for civil society, and what are the big challenges for local governments now? So it sounds like, I mean, there is corruption is still on the radar, but that's a very positive sign that in Ukraine it's on the radar, whereas in countries like Russia, there's no hope of addressing that issue right now. So what are the big challenges for civil society and local politics right now?
Talking about local level, I would say the key challenge today is to keep the decentralization reform and to keep the recovery decentralized, because you know, a recovery is really big topic now, big issue. And we remember that in 2022, I would say there were some attempts by central authorities to centralize these recovery processes, you know, basically to create this huge monster in Kyiv, which would decide about recovery, you know, 500 kilometers away from Kyiv. And our message was that in order to have a recovery successful, we have to keep it as decentralized as possible. And here we have a good example with our NGO. This was basically, we created our NGO when in early April 2022, when we saw Russians leaving first Ukrainian cities, and we realized in what condition they are leaving those cities. So this was when we realized that recovery would be, you know, in huge demand in the next year, if not decades. We established this NGO and we started working with the city of Mykolaiv, which is southern Ukrainian city. And we started working with it because of two reasons. We know the mayor, who is, by the way, very good example of, I would say, de-Sovietization of Ukraine, because in, you know, the city of Mykolaiv was always kind of one of the most not even pro-Russian, but pro-Soviet cities. It was under USSR, it was closed city, and foreigners were not allowed to enter the city because it was big shipbuilding city. And even like until recently, the moods in Mykolaiv were quite pro-Soviet. And usually those were people, pro-Russian people, who were in charge of the city, very corrupt, very pro-Russian. And suddenly in 2015, a young IT English-speaking person wins the elections. You know, it was a huge surprise. And he was trying to do some positive changes. We were helping him. And that's why we tried to, he stayed in the city actually during the occupation. The Russians almost surrounded the city, and because of the geography, if Mykolaiv had fallen, this would have opened way for Russians to invade Odessa and Dnipropetrovsk regions. So, but because of the strong civic resistance, well, of course, army was present there, civic resistance, Mykolaiv did not fall, and I think it played a crucial role in saving southern and central Ukraine. But Russians basically were standing for several months, like 30 kilometers away from Mykolaiv. So basically they reached the city with their artillery, not missiles, but even artillery. So the city was pretty much damaged and destroyed. And we started helping Mykolaiv, and we actually had a very good case because in spring 2022, there were a series of statements from foreign countries who said, okay, we are taking under auspices recovery of this specific city or this specific region. Unfortunately, this system did not go well, didn't work out, except for Mykolaiv and Denmark. So they were really fortunate to have such a partner as the Kingdom of Denmark. Who have decided to take under coordination recovery of Mykolaiv. And we were basically engaged to organize, basically to manage this cooperation from the first days. I remember that at one of the first meetings of Mayor Sienkiewicz and Ambassador of Denmark, the mayor said perfect phrase. He said, listen, we do not need your money. We need projects and we need their results. And actually, the less money are coming through my officials, the better I sleep. We created this system that the authorities of Mykolaiv collected demands, needs of the city, what exactly they need for recovery. And here we are talking like not about long-term recovery, but about emergency needs, because, well, the water supply system was destroyed, the many buildings, residential houses were destroyed without windows, and so on and so on. And we were collecting, this like hundreds of specific projects. How the length of the water pipe they need to fix a very specific district, the number of plywood to cover all the windows, the like technique, equipment, and so on and so on. So it was, we had to cooperate with city departments, with city municipal enterprises. We had to collect this, like dozens, hundreds of specific projects, basically to turn them into projects, because the information we were provided was, very general information, but Danes were asking us to turn them like in mini projects. And on the other hand, we cooperated with organizations that were given by Kingdom of Denmark, like these were organizations like International Organization of Migration, Danish Red Cross, ICRC, and so on and so on, because Denmark has already had some contractual relations with them, and they could have bought all this equipment in quite, well, relatively speedy way. So our task was to secure city with all this equipment by winter, because, well, the winter was coming and it was a question of survival for many people, because it was related to electricity, heating supply, water supply, and so on and so on. And so we have managed by winter, we heard like, we don't know the total number, but we know that we heard one number that we provided, we helped to provide assistance to Mykolaiv worth 30 million euro, without a single euro going through the budget of Mykolaiv. So basically, we excluded corruption risk because all procurement were conducted by these international organizations, which have very high corruption standards. But we managed to provide this support. I mean, it was quite a lot of work, because during this 6 months, I had like every day several calls with either city departments or international organizations, to basically to reach agreement on the specific needs, to connect the needs and demand and supply. But it was a good example how decentralized recovery can work. And I was just imagining, if we had to do it via state agency or like ministry. Well, first, we have some additional corruption risks, but it's not even about corruption, it's about efficiency. Like having every day several calls, and if I had to get approval from like state agency here, it would take twice as much time. So if you're talking about decentralization, it's first about decreasing corruption risks, and second, it's about efficiency. And this is basically the system of subsidiarity that the EU is based on. If you can solve some problem on local level, why would you move it to the regional or national level? So, and this is, but at the same time, we work quite closely with the Ministry of Regions, Ministry of Recovery, and so basically we were coordinating. They were quite open, talking about ministries, like the leadership of the ministry. They were quite open about our recommendations, advices. So they do listen to civil society, they do listen to local authorities, and that's why that's how we try to create this. We call it architecture of recovery of Ukraine, so that everything is as efficient as possible.
That's an amazing story about how funds were used at the local level while sidestepping any possibility of corruption. I'm wondering if you think that enough of the international support and aid going to Ukraine is going to the actual local level And I also imagine that Olga Nikolska might have something to say about this, given your job. But is the international support, do international partners realize the importance of local level initiatives, or are they trying to stay at the national level?
I think for international partners, it would be easier to work with international level, but still, from what I see, they try to approach local authorities. But here, I would say it more depends not on international partners, but it really depends on local authorities. Because, quite often I was witnessing situation when, let's say, local mayor would come to some ambassador, investor, donor, and he would like come and say like, well, can you help my community? Like, sure, we can. How exactly? Well, in general, like, can you help my community? Well, and this was like the end of conversation. So what we are trying to do now, we are working with communities. We are helping them to prepare development strategies, or even more often, so-called plan for recovery of development, the recovery plan. And this recovery plan usually consists of numerous projects, very specific projects, like reconstruction of school, reconstruction of a water supply system, water sewage system, youth center, and so on and so on. For example, we have prepared 9 recovery plans for 9 communities, and they contain almost 1,400 specific projects. So that's why we are now communicating with different partners and trying to engage partners to realization of these projects. And second, we try to teach local authorities how to be, these project managers themselves. We are helping them to establish project offices to train local people who would be applying for those grants to international partners themselves, and basically bringing those grants themselves and managing these grants themselves. So I would say that initiative of local authorities is one of the key challenges here and one of the key opportunities for them.
We have a question in the chat, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jeff. We'll finish up our moderating today. We're actually, only have 15 minutes left in our hour. This has gone so quickly. But Robert Knott in the Q&A, one of our attendees, is asking how effective formal financial management is, and if the Ministry of Finance or the Bureau of the Budget, if they're capable of monitoring and reviewing expenditures, is there a need for more training and technology to improve management?
On national level, on the ministerial level, you mean?
Yes, yeah. So at the national level, is there a need for more training and technology? Or you spoke about this earlier, so maybe it sounds like actually they've been tremendously successful in reforming this at the national level in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, like there are still, in general, I would say the situation is quite good, but there are always room for improvement. Like, for example, that some 2 years ago, we revealed that the system of supply for the army of like foods and meals was extremely inefficient, with huge money paid for the products. And then we had created the system, the agency which was responsible for reforming the system, and they successfully reformed it. And by the way, the person who was in charge of this agency, he was the one appointed earlier by acting Minister Uliana Supron, who was reforming the medical procurement system. So we had some previous experience already before the big war, and now they are basically entering different ministries like Ministry of Defense and trying to reform very specific areas. So I would say that in general, there is like, in terms of financial monitoring, the situation is quite good because, well, we have a very strong oversight from the European Union as part of these negotiations going on with the European Union. So I would say, it's not only us, the Ukrainians, who are doing this monitoring, but Europeans as well. So I would say in general, situation is good, but there is always room for improvement.
Thank you. Thank you. Sarah's had to step out, and thank you for moderating and also keeping on some of the topic. It's very, very, very informative. I kind of wanted, since you mentioned the military, I know that some of your emphasis is on supporting the military, and I thought maybe we could shift a little bit and you could talk about kind of like how military and civil initiatives have kind of been at the forefront of some of your work. And then maybe you could give a little bit of insight about, obviously with the length of time and things change, people's perceptions change. So how do we continue support? How does that look like? And what strategies have you found successful in supporting Ukraine's military?
So obviously we need Like, first of all, we need advocacy for more weapons coming to Ukraine, because we volunteers, we cannot bring, tanks and artillery to Ukraine or missiles. So here we can do work only through advocacy. And for example, for us, we cannot understand why Washington is not allowing Ukraine to use long-range missiles. There is not a single argument against this, because, well, Russians are attacking Ukrainian territories from all over their country. So they're killing our not only military energy infrastructure, but they are attacking residential buildings, well, killing children. Like two days ago, there was another attack in Ukraine, killing 9 and 11-year boys. I mean, and the only way to stop is, well, one of the ways is to allow Ukraine to use long-range missiles. And unfortunately, we cannot get this approval, but we are advocating on all possible platforms. And the same was the case with the jets, like F-16s. In 2022, it was taboo. Nobody was talking about it, but it was actually a campaign launched by civil society. I know those people who were basically elaborating this campaign, launching this campaign. And when they actually came to the authorities, Ukrainian authorities, they said like, no, the West will not go for this, like, forget about it. And then Ukrainian civil society was pushing first Ukrainian authorities and then foreign authorities, and then together to achieve this goal. And as a result, we have first jets in Ukraine. And so this was, I would say, the first way to help the army by civil society of Ukraine. And second is to work directly. Even so, situation is in the army is, quite better today than it was in 2014, when the army was destroyed by a pro-Russian president, Mr. Yanukovych. But still, quite often this is, very specific needs some military unit or soldier needs. Like, for example, my organization is not that big, but, I counted that I have to collect around like 2,000-3,000 USD per month to secure needs of my friends in the army. And so that's why I have this organization, Freedom Friends. I am just collecting donations, organizing, like buying drones, thermal vision devices, and so on to help my friends in the army. And I would say there are quite many such organizations in Ukraine. This is why one of the another examples of this like horizontal ties, which really were elaborated through decentralization, through strengthening of civil society, through all this networking that was happening for years, that is helping, to survive and even to help the army today to win the war.
So, do you see resistance by organizations that are outside of Ukraine to directly support supplies to the military? I know that there are organizations who are supplying for recovery vehicles. They're supplying. They may have a specific purpose, but what's your impression of how there may be a double standard in organizations outside of Ukraine willing to donate to reconstruction or to other civil society organizations in Ukraine and not, or be resistant to donating directly to supporting the military efforts, particularly around supplies?
Well, I would say if you're talking about public institutions, there are obviously some like legal and political obstacles why they cannot directly support the army. And basically all the donations, well, I mean, we do have military support, which is coming as part of military packages. But if we are talking about these like money that are coming for the support of Ukraine, so basically they are going to, let's say, to support social part of Ukraine, like, paying pensions, salaries in public sector, and so on and so on. And so they cannot go directly, let's say, for the payment of soldier salaries. And that's why we have chosen this topic of recovery of Ukraine, because it's like directly linked to creation of internal GDP, of paying more taxes by local communities, so that these taxes are going to support the army. Talking about international partners, I would say it's not like resistance or some other reason. I would say it's a kind of, fatigue, that people are tired of the war. It's lack of understanding that we still have the war, because, I remember first months of the war, I was like, my friends from Poland, from United States, from everywhere were sending like money, drones, everything, that I was like, I didn't have capacity properly, even to distribute it timely. So now the problem is different. It's difficult even to collect, like this, like $2,000-3,000 per month. But I mean, it's more likely it's about not about resistance, but it's about fatigue, and it's about lack of understanding that if Ukraine fails, any European country can become next country attacked by Russia.
Right. So with that, I'm gonna, there are a couple Q&A questions that I think kind of resonate with that. So I'm gonna start with Courtney's. Courtney says, how do you help people both domestically and internationally envision Ukraine's future in a tangible and motivating way, given how stuck the war seems to be? She comments, I'm living in Europe currently, and a lot of people just don't know what's going to happen and aren't sure what to think or to aim for. So kind of a follow-up to that last comment, and then I'll move to the other questions in a moment.
Yes, I agree. There is lack of information, understanding about what is happening in Ukraine. So that's why there are quite many Ukrainian activists who are traveling all around the world, trying to bring these messages about what's happening in Ukraine, about mobilizing support for Ukraine, even about mobilizing citizens of other countries so that they can do some pressure on their governments to be more helpful for Ukraine. But I would say that, well, I already see there are quite many businesses, investors who are coming to Ukraine. Some of them even start some activities, but most of them, they realize that after the war, Ukraine will be a huge country of opportunities because of many reasons. They are already, thinking what to do in Ukraine, how to launch the business. Some of them are already like starting some businesses, but clearly, there are some war risks, some other obstacles. But I would say that there is already this perception by many, I would say, first of all, business elites that who see Ukraine as a very successful country after the war, and they are considering, coming here and do their business here in Ukraine.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that. During a discussion with a large kind of academic group, there was a discussion about there's still an emphasis on aid versus investment, and that part of the discussion that is trying to take place in Europe and US is that investment is what's needed. I mean, as much as maybe relief, but and that has an entirely different impact on what can happen. So I'm just going to ask the quick question, Robert Knox. Has UN Development Project or USAID been useful for your agency, your specific agency?
UN Development Project?
Yeah, has the UN Development Project or USAID been useful for your agency?
I mean, we do have cooperation communication, but for now, as far as I know, no, we had one grant from USAID. Yes, we have cooperated.
Okay.
Because we had different partners, like Danish partners, EU Anti-Corruption Initiative, UNDP, yes, USAID, and yeah, so we try to to diversify our cooperation with international partners. But yeah, USAID was one of them.
Great. Barbara basically has a comment she wanted me to pass along. I'm grateful to having you describe examples of success and a strong justification for the success of community level work to address local needs, even for the anticipated reconstruction, which will have to take place nationwide. So she wanted to express her appreciation. And then Courtney wanted to point out that Rebuild Ukraine is taking, the trade expo is actually taking place in Warsaw next month, and that looks like it's going to be someplace.
I plan to go there, by the way. So if you are there, we'll be happy to.
Good. I would just like to shift because we are getting last 5 minutes of the hour, and we want to keep you. Maybe talk about your work with Russian disintegration, because I think that's a key component of the work that you're doing, and I think it's of interest to our audience. Specifically, it's something that I'm interested in hearing about.
Yeah, but this is topic not for 5 minutes, but for 5 hours. But okay, let me try.
I'm sure. I don't mean to cut you off. We can go a little over,
no problem.
But I thought it would be at least point out for our audience the work that you're doing, and then maybe we could also post some links so that later people can investigate and they can find out more about it.
Yeah, I would say that how we came to this idea that like during first months of the war, we have realized that it will take a while. It will not end in 2-3 weeks. It will take, it may last for years. And even if we imagine that there is some kind of, I don't know, agreement, ceasefire, it's only a question of time that when Russia attacks again. Let's say if so-called liberal democratic opposition comes to power in Russia, so there are two scenarios possible. First, if they sincerely try to reform the country, they will be either removed by former KGB officers, I don't know, military, and who will attack Ukraine as well, or they will become imperialists themselves. Because, well, we remember very well when Yeltsin came to power, he was perceived by the West as a Democrat who will reform the country. And then 2 years later, he started a bloody Chechen war, killing, almost one third of Chechen population. Then we had another reformer, Putin, who came to power, who was perceived on the West as reformer. Then we had Medvedev, who was a kind of... Okay, so I mean, there was like everyone who was perceived by the West as a Democrat reformer turned out to be imperialists, and who started numerous wars against neighboring or not even neighboring countries like Syria. So that's why, our message is, if Russia remains within its borders after this war, it's only a matter of time when Russia attacks again either Ukraine or any other country, any other neighboring country. So we were, like trying to find solution. Well, I mean, there are quite many people who would like to see, let's say, ocean of dreams instead of Russia, but you cannot get rid of 140 million of people. They cannot disappear. And, and there is, like, I would say, this psychological approach of post-Soviet countries, which was especially visible in 1990s, that winner takes it all. So that's why we had these bloody wars between different oligarchs, businesses, that you cannot coexist. You have to kill basically to murder your opponent, to take over his business empire, and that's how you become successful. While the West, for decades has lived on the basis of principle win-win. So how do we cooperate? How do we achieve victory, both of us? So that we used this approach when we were elaborating this idea of free nations of Russia. Because if we cannot destroy it, let's think how to make it beneficial for new system, new structure of Russia. And we started talking to representatives of different captive nations of Russia, like Chechens, Tatars, Bashkorts, as well as regions, like Siberians, Karelia, and so on, who directly are talking, even though they are Russian citizens by their passport, who are directly talking that they do not want to be part of Russia anymore. They want their regions to be independent. Because imagine, now all resources are taken from those regions to Moscow to sustain Putin's corrupt regime, extremely corrupt regime, and to support his international wars. And these are huge money. Instead of keeping this money in their regions and invest in, I don't know, infrastructure, healthcare, education, and so on and so on. So if those countries become independent, we will basically have, I would say, a win-win-win situation, because it would be win for Ukraine for obvious reasons. It will be win for the West because Russia will disappear as a geopolitical threat for the entire world. And it would be win for the ordinary citizens who live today in Russia, because they will achieve opportunity to to establish their own states, to develop those states as democratic, successful states, and have direct relations with the West. I mean, trade, political relations, which would be beneficial for them and for the West. And obviously, 3 years ago, when we were talking about this topic, this topic was, quite toxic. You would be quite often blacklisted if you were talking to somebody from officials about this. So our task was, to shift conversations about this idea from toxic to mainstream topic. So that the West at least includes Russian. We do not call collapse. We call Russian decolonization scenario as one of possible scenarios in this direction. And we are trying to explain that, it's not about we want to destroy Russia. On the contrary, even, I mean, it may sound as a paradox, we want to bring benefits for ordinary Russians, which is the only way, in my opinion, to end the war in long term.
Thank you. That was very relevant and very well explained, by the way, in not 5 hours, but I'm sure that there are many nuances. Where I noticed, and then maybe we'll wrap up as if you wouldn't mind. Where is that process now? I know that there was a forum, if I'm not mistaken. Was it in Brussels or Poland? And I may be mistaken. And
So
how is
we
that
have
conversation?
we have organized already, I think, 12 forums all over the world. Most of them were in Europe. We started from Warsaw in May 2022, but then we had one forum in Japan, one actually recently in Taipei. And actually 3 forums were held in the parliaments in in the European Parliament, in Japan, and in Italy. And we had 2 events in Washington. Together, the latest one was with the Jamestown Foundation, and we had even former ambassadors to Ukraine and Russia, American ambassadors who were present there as speakers. And the next event will be organized in Canada on November 19. So this is like, these are regular events that we are like organizing and it's, it's like the main message is not that we have there like Ukrainians, I don't know, Poles, Americans who are talking about Russian decolonization. We have representatives of those captive nations who are like from Russia, who are from their regions, who are talking about that they want to achieve independence for their countries, whether it's Chechnya, Bashkortostan, Siberia, Karelia, and so on and so on. And they see their countries as democratic countries who want to have good relations with the West, instead of organizing yet another war.
Thank you very much. So since we're past the hour, I thought I'd just finish the last Q&A and then maybe just have you close with a statement, whatever you feel. So David O'Keefe says, thank you for the great session. Keep up the great work. Courtney, one of my classmates is researching national republics, minority populations, and anti-colonial activism in Russia, but she's having a hard time finding fellow academics who are well-versed in this area. If you have any information to share on this, we would be happy for some guidance or some suggestions. And if there's a reference you can offer right now, that'd be great. And if not, we can maybe post some references to our webpage after the session as well. And then she follows up with perhaps the forum Taras just mentioned is one such additional resource. If there's a link or something, please share. And finally, Tamara, thank you for being a very interesting and informative presentation. Looking forward to more discussions on how to strengthen Ukrainian-US ties. So thank you for your time this evening. And if you'd like, if there's something you'd like to close with, a message or a view or any closing words, I'd appreciate it. I'm certain others would as well.
Yeah, sure. You may share my email with all attendees, and yes, I will send to Courtney, or if you have any other questions, I'll send directly what exactly you need. Well, my message is short that yes, we are going through really hard times now. We are really grateful for your support on personal level, on national level, and well, keep supporting us because our future should be together. We should work together on the victory, and we should live in peace in long term in the future.
Very well said. And I'm sure everybody on the Zoom call tonight appreciates the webinar. So again, Taras, thank you for your time tonight. We really appreciate it. Olha, thank you for being here. I know Roman sends his best wishes, and Sarah was very engaged. So I think she was able to fill her political science question for tonight. So thank you for your time. And I'd like to invite everybody back next week. Please go to our website. You can see a list of our upcoming speakers and information about where we're going in the next few weeks. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night.
It was my pleasure. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.